Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz here in our Northwest Side studio.
And I'm Brandis Friedman reporting live from Chicago's Auburn Gresham neighborhood.
On the show tonight, a judge rules on the governor's coronavirus actions, local movie theaters reopen, the movement toward canceling ACTs and SATs, the revival of a classic Chicago beer, and a conflict between 19th century social reformers in tonight's Ask Jeffrey.
And Paris, as I mentioned, I am live tonight in Chicago's Auburn Gresham neighborhood on the city's south side where I'll be co-anchoring. You know, Paris, you came to this neighborhood in April, earlier on in the pandemic, but we wanted to return for a couple of reasons. One, to see how this COVID hotspot has been managing in the pandemic, but also to see how activists are working to increase the peace in advance of what is typically a violent weekend in the city of Chicago. So we'll have more on both of those stories in just a bit, of course, but for now we'll send it back to you for more of today's developments.
Thanks, Brandis. And it looks like a lot of activists are mobilizing behind you. We look forward to your reports. And breaking news this evening, Mayor Lori Lightfoot is issuing an emergency travel order for anyone traveling to Chicago from states experiencing a surge in COVID-19 cases. The mayor made the announcement in a series of tweets asking travelers from those states to quarantine at home for a period of 14 days. The states on the list right now are Alabama, Arkansas, Arizona, California, Florida, Georgia, Idaho, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, Nevada, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, and Utah. It's unclear how this order would be enforced. Also from the mayor today, a stern warning to bars and restaurants that don't abide by social distancing and indoor capacity rules for the 4th of July weekend.
We're going to be out and we're going to be active and we're going to be looking. And if we see businesses that are flouting the rules, that are putting your profit over the public health and safety of your workers, of members of the public, we're not going to hesitate to shut you down. And if you are shut down, you're not coming back.
The warning comes after reports that trendy areas like Wrigleyville had bars filled to capacity with patrons not engaging in social distancing, as it looks like they are doing at this restaurant. Chicago and Illinois have been in phase 4 of COVID recovery for 1 week, with restaurants allowed to operate at 25% capacity. And Illinois health officials report more than 800 new known COVID-19 cases today for a total of nearly 145,000, and an additional 36 deaths reported today for a statewide total of just under 7,000. The 7-day testing positivity rate is 2.6%. When and if baseball comes back later this month, some Cubs fans will be able to enjoy the action in person. From the rooftops, that is. The city reached a deal with the rooftops to operate at 25% capacity during games. No word yet on whether fans will be allowed inside baseball stadiums. Major League Baseball has announced a shortened 60-game season to start either July 23rd or 24th. As promised, our neighborhood reporting goes on now weekly every Thursday night. And tonight, Brandis Friedman is reporting from Chicago's Auburn Gresham neighborhood, a majority black working class community that at the beginning of the pandemic was considered a COVID-19 hotspot. As of late, though, it has also become a hotspot for some of the city's increasing violence. Brandis joins us now from near a pillar of that community, St. Sabina Church. So, Brandis, what's going on there?
So, you know, Paris, it's actually been a flurry of activity outside St. Sabina all this afternoon, and I'm going to come back to that in just a little bit. But what's happening behind me right now is a demand justice rally. It's happening on the steps of St. Sabina, obviously organized by the church and some members of the community here. And they're sending a big message, Paris, and I mean that literally, a very big message. On the side street right next to me on 78th Place next to St. Sabina, a member of the church community has painted a mural on the street, and it reads, "Demand justice," in massive letters. Church pastor Father Michael Flager explains what they mean by that.
We want justice of investment and opportunity. We want investment of resources, of jobs and economic development and good schools and access to health care, access to food. We want help with housing in the neighborhood. So we want justice for that. From the economic level and the investment level.
Now, this community area, it also reflects the increase in shootings and murders that the city has been experiencing in recent weeks. Numbers from the Chicago Police Department show that there were 10 murders in the 6th Police District, where Auburn Gresham sits, from the beginning of June through the 28th. 5 of them were from June 22nd through the 28th. Now, those are significant increases over the year 2019, that same time period, when murders for those first 28 days of June, they're up 150% compared to the same time period last year. Shootings up 59%. Now, the 4th of July, sadly, is notoriously a very violent weekend in Chicago, and numbers already show that it's on the rise across the city, as we reported just yesterday, on its way to matching the 2016 historic high that the city experienced. The mayor and the police department say that they are preparing what they're calling an all-hands-on-deck approach this weekend. They've already deployed an additional 1,200 police officers today through the weekend. They say particularly in neighborhood hotspots that have experienced high levels of summer violence. Lightfoot says for all the focus on public safety the next few days, the real work doesn't end this weekend or anytime soon.
If we are truly to reverse the epidemic of gun violence and make every neighborhood safe and secure, we need to continue working to reverse the circumstances that underpin it. The circumstances that lead people to feel like their only option is the streets and gangs and drugs. That means reversing the generations of inequity, of poverty, lack of hope, and despair.
Now, the mayor's office says the all-hands-on-deck approach means not just police, but also partnering with community organizations that mediate conflict and interrupt violence on the streets. Now, we spoke with one such organization. It's called the Target Area Development Corporation. They work here in Auburn Gresham. They say they've got their own strategy for how to disrupt violence this weekend.
On pop-ups and, focus on the hotspots and stuff. And canvas. Yes. And be visible at all times.
Main thing is to try and distract them from the norm, what they normally do. So we will be barbecuing, whatever we can do to take their mindset off what they normally do, where they end up in trouble or violence ends up happening.
Now, back here at St. Sabina, I mentioned it's been a busy day. That's because here in the parking lot, community organizations partnered with Molina Healthcare to give away food to about 500 families. Additionally, CORE, or Community Organized Relief Effort, that's the one founded by actor Sean Penn, provided a mobile testing site for COVID-19 with drive-up testing.
So it's like I've been in and out of going to work ever since the pandemic started. So, just to see, and I brought my son with me, so just wanted to get a test and see.
I have run short. My refrigerator is like really empty. So it's only me, but like I said, I've been unemployed since March. So unemployment is screwing around with me. So like I said, every little thing helps. Yeah. And I appreciate it. I really appreciate it.
Now, Paris, when you were here back in April, one of the concerns that you heard from elected officials at the time was that there was not enough testing in this community that was considered to be a COVID-19 hotspot for the coronavirus, that there wasn't enough of that being done. Clearly, there's some more testing being done in this community now, but we're going to have a little bit more on that coming up later on in the broadcast.
All right, thanks, Brandon. It's always great to see how that community comes together. Let's hope for a peaceful weekend, and we'll see you in just a bit. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker takes a win and a loss in court as separate judges make opposite rulings on his executive actions during the coronavirus pandemic. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with the latest. Amanda, what is the latest on this?
Well, Paris will do the bad news for Pritzker first, and that is that a judge in downstate Clay County this afternoon ruled that the governor exceeded his authority by issuing consecutive executive orders in response to COVID-19. Republican State Representative Darren Bailey, who brought the lawsuit against the governor, called it a victory for Illinois.
It feels awesome because this is freedom. This is freedom. I don't get it. He explains it so perfectly well that we don't allow one person, Governor J.B. Pritzker, that has never in his life been here. It's disastrous. So that alone suggests to me that somebody does not know what they are doing and that they desire totalitarian rule. That's what we are experiencing, and it's time to say no more.
Now, just what the effect of this case is depends on who you talk to. The judge ruled that any COVID-19 related executive order issued after early April is void, as if it never existed. The court declares defendant had no Illinois constitutional authority as governor to restrict a citizen's movement or activities and or forcibly close business premises. The court order reads. Here's Bailey's attorney.
So as we stand here today, any executive order out there, one of them that comes to mind with me is one of the most recent that limits the occupancy that people can have in their businesses. That's gone as we stand here right now. They don't have, as of right now, as we stand here.
But the Illinois Attorney General isn't giving an interpretation. In a statement, the office said only, we are reviewing the decision and evaluating our options. The governor's office does have an opinion, though, and that is that his executive orders still stand. They're saying it's what got Illinois to the point where it's doing better than other states in the Midwest in terms of having a lower COVID-19 positivity rate. The way the Pritzker administration sees it, nothing in the Clay County judge's order trumps the various other court decisions related to how the governor has used his authority during the pandemic, including the other case that came down today. And this one, Pritzker won. It was in federal court. The Illinois Republican Party had sued, arguing that as a political party, it should be able to meet without limitations, similar to the rules that govern religious gatherings. But in her order, U.S. District Judge Sarah Ellis wrote that granting the GOP the relief that it's seeking would pose serious health risks. The current state of our nation demands that we sacrifice the benefits of in-person interactions for the greater good. And joining the order would risk infections amongst members of the Illinois Republican Party and its regional affiliates, as well as their families, friends, neighbors, and coworkers, Ellis wrote. Now, briefly, do want to add that regardless of this court back and forth, local governments do have the ability to continue to impose their own restrictions. So all that Chicago is doing, that still stands. Now, as for these court back and forths, that's not the only battle that Governor Pritzker has on his hands. If you dare to stray from Channel 11, you may see this ad on TV.
Pritzker ripped out his toilets to dodge paying property taxes. Investigators called it a scheme to defraud taxpayers. Now, Pritzker is scheming again. First, he raised taxes on gas, cars, and online shopping. Then,
the ad is paid for by a dark money super PAC called Illinois Rising Action. We do know that it is run by folks with affiliations to the GOP. Pritzker, a billionaire who has plenty of his own money to hit back with his own ads, well, he did just that.
Seen this ad? It's paid for by the same Republican group who brought you Donald Trump. But why are they attacking Governor Pritzker? Because he's calling out the president's failed leadership. Don't believe their lies.
The spot goes on to praise Pritzker's leadership, particularly since COVID-19 arrived. The governor's senior political advisor told me that these Illinois Rising ads were a blatant hit and that they weren't going to let those lies go unanswered. Mind you, while there is an election in November, Pritzker himself is not on the ballot. But one of his signature initiatives is the one that would change the state constitution, moving Illinois to a graduated income tax structure. Now, due to the coronavirus, November's election is going to be different no matter what. Expect a huge effort to get voters to cast their ballots by mail. There may also be more third-party or independent candidates on the ballot, and here's why. Illinois makes it really hard for candidates to run unless they're doing it under the mantle of the Republican or the Democratic parties. But the Libertarian and Green parties had filed a lawsuit in court saying that during the coronavirus, it's hard to get signatures. You can't very well go door to door and talk to people. So they won, meaning it's easier for them to get on the ballot.
Supposedly the beacon of democracy for the world, but the ballot access laws in this nation can be very bad, and Illinois is among the worst.
One of the candidates aiming to get on that November ballot, well, he'll sound familiar. Willie Wilson today officially declared that he is running for the U.S. Senate. He'll be running as the leader of a new party that he has dubbed the Willie Wilson Party.
Now, I'm running for the U.S. Senate. I use my own money. So there ain't no conflict there. I'm running for the people. And I don't know what the U.S. Senate make, but whatever paycheck that is, I'll give it away to the community.
Wilson says he does believe in reparations, but he is not necessarily all for what the Black Lives Matter movement is asking. Nonetheless, he says he believes incumbent U.S. Senator Dick Durbin and other Democrats have taken Black and brown communities and voters for granted. Also in that race, Republican Mark Curran. Ferris, back to you.
All right, Amanda, thank you so much. And up next, how are movie theaters reopening during Phase 4? We hear from some industry leaders about what precautions they're taking.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Allstate. Allstate is investing in Chicago's youth. We believe good starts young. That's why we're helping our youth develop the skills they need to achieve success in life. Allstate is proud to empower the next generation of leaders.
For many, it seems like the last few months have been like living in a bad movie. But now some local movie theaters are welcoming fans back in to buy some popcorn and to watch an actual film on the big screen. More are scheduled to open this weekend, and large chains are saying they'll be ready for audiences later this month. But is it safe, and will audiences come out to sit in the dark with strangers as the pandemic moves forward? Joining us with more are Chris Johnson, owner and CEO of Classic Cinemas, a local theater chain, and Ryan Oestreich, general manager of the Music Box Theater, an independent movie house on Chicago's North Side. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. Chris Johnson, I want to start with you. Classic Cinemas has been open for about a week. Is it safe to go to the movies?
Absolutely. I think that once you go in, I think the proof is in the pudding. You'll see all the precautions and everything that we've done, and I think you'll feel very safe.
Ryan Oestreich, what are some of the precautions taken at the Music Box?
Plenty of precautions. Masks are absolutely required. Our staff will have them as well, including gloves. Everything will be wiped down with frequency. The movie theaters will be, the show times will be staggered, so basically we can air out the house completely between shows and clean down all the used seats. We're just taking a lot of precautions in terms of anything that could be cleaned or could be done by the CDC or the state of Illinois or the city of Chicago guidelines. We are absolutely taking them just so that our staff and customers can feel safe when seeing a movie in our theater.
And Chris Johnson, you operate a local chain. There's 11 theaters, as I understand. 2 of them, Tivoli and the Oak Park Lake Theater, are not open. Have you seen patrons coming back in numbers that you want to see?
They have been coming back. Actually, last Friday, we had kind of an enthusiastic open, but in all candor, not in the numbers that that get me excited. And so, yeah, it's hard to sort of weigh the expense of operating with implementing all the increased protocols at the same time, with a reduced box office, which is in part because of the lack of new product and a little bit on the capacity side as well.
And Ryan Oestreich, what are the innovative ways the Music Box has been able to stay afloat over the last 3 months during this shutdown? I mean, you're joining us right now from your outdoor garden theater.
Yeah, so we tried just about everything. We have done concessions to go orders. We did a Music Box garage sale. We're a 90-year-old venue, so of course you could imagine all of the old things we could find that people would love to own, including some of these reels, old 35 and 60 millimeter reels. We've done a lot of virtual cinema, which basically is us curating new movies where our customers can stay at home and stay safe there. We've been doing that since the shutdown. And then we opened up the garden, which is an outdoor open space. It's kind of like a secret space. We don't want it to be a secret. More people should know about it because we have a lounge bar. And we've been showing movies in the garden, and people love it. They can be outdoors on a lovely June or July evening and watch a movie. Last weekend it was Purple Rain, and this weekend it's going to be a 90s horror movie called I Know What You Did Last Summer.
I do remember that one, and I assume you're not selling that classic pump organ, although I'm sure you could get a lot of money for that. Chris Johnson, you alluded to this earlier. I've been so lost in the news, I have no idea what's going on in the movie industry. What are the movies that are out right now?
Well, there are no new movies out right now. So all the movies we're playing are throwback or movies that were in theater prior to the shutdown. So, you know, there's, for instance, I should have this all, I think this week, Deadpool is one of the big movies. We did play Trolls, which, you know, for family film, or families that was supposed to be released in April. We picked that up, and you know, we'll be playing Empire Strikes Back next week, and we're just doing a host of sort of different demographics and genres. But most of the films are movies that you've absolutely heard of before. Probably a little different than, well, actually, at the Music Box, I mean, they have a little bit more eclectic palette. So, you know, trying to hit both sides of it at least.
Yeah, what about that, Ryan Ostrich? I mean, you've always had an eclectic schedule at the Music Box with some indie new films and some classic old films. Is that what you're doing now?
That's exactly what we're known for, and that's exactly what we're reopening with. We actually surveyed our customers and asked them, you know, when are you ready to come back? What sort of things would you like to see? And also, you know, what movies would you be excited about? And 70 millimeter is always something high up on the list for folks. So we were suspended, or we closed in our 70 millimeter fest, so we're reopening with 70 millimeter with 2001: A Space Odyssey. And then we'll be going to Vertigo next week. So these will get week-long runs. And then we'll have some new indie films in our smaller theater. We're going to have Good Trouble, the John Lewis documentary, playing for a couple of weeks. And then we have a new independently made horror movie coming up after that. So yeah, it'll be the mix of what you know from the Music Box, but start big, right? 70 millimeter, big temporary screen in the big house. You'll only be one of 50, but you'll probably be socially distanced about 25 feet away from anybody else, because it's such a large auditorium, but it'll be a great experience for people who come out.
Absolutely, that is a giant auditorium. And the big movie theater chains around the country, they say they plan to reopen by July 30th. So here's what Cinemark CEO Mark Zarate had to say about that.
At Cinemark, we're thrilled to once again welcome you to a shared, immersive experience as we begin the phased reopening of our theaters. There's nothing quite as powerful as great cinematic storytelling on the big screen. And we wanted to ensure the time was right before we reopened our doors.
All right, Chris Johnson, so you see the big chains are going to come back, but as you look at COVID exploding, especially across some South and Southwestern states, is there worry that this reopening is going to be temporary?
Absolutely. You know, the one thing that the virus really doesn't care about what we're looking to do. And, you know, the other part that also hurts is that even though Illinois looks like to be in pretty good shape, if New York and LA aren't in the picture, then the new releases, you know, could be bumped again. And so that's our big concern. Absolutely.
Ryan Ostrich, you know, the Music Box, a small independent theater, how long can it go with reduced capacity? How long can it be financially solvent?
I think right now we're just trying to break even with the idea that at some point we'll hopefully be able to have more than 50 people in our main theater, or find other revenue streams to keep us going. But I don't have a magic ball to look into and tell you, you know, at what point it just becomes too much for us. I know right now we're on thin ice. It's a grim picture for us, but we're going to try to make this work, and we're going to try to be a good steward for our industry and for the movie theater business in general.
And we'll hope it's a happy ending. I want to thank you both, Chris Johnson and Ryan Ostrich, for joining us.
Thank you.
And up next, we check back in with Brandis, who's live in Chicago's Auburn Gresham neighborhood. But first, a look at the weather. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, some colleges are doing away with the ACT and SAT this year, others for good.
There are lots of things that should be lost to history, but this beer is not one of them.
A landmark Chicago beer is back in production. And a story of a clash between women's suffragists and anti-lynching activists in Ask Jeffrey. But first, we check back in with Brandis Friedman, who's co-anchoring in Chicago's Auburn Gresham neighborhood. Brandis.
Hey, Paris. So we're joined now by Todd Belcourt with Social Change, one of the organizations that helped organize the food giveaway that we saw here at St. Sabina this afternoon. Todd, thanks for joining us. First, tell us about Social Change. What is your mission?
Social Change is committed to liberation through policy action, direct action like you saw today. We're meeting the needs of community members by providing food, while also going out and telling stories through film and other mechanisms so more people understand the struggles of peoples worldwide.
You also saw, you guys had enough food today to give away to 500 families. There was the pop-up testing site or the mobile testing site next door as well. What does the turnout that you saw today tell you about the need in the community?
The turnout was both heartening and heartbreaking. Heartening in that we had the opportunity to plan an event where organizations, business leaders are able to come together and provide food to meet the need, but also heartbreaking in that it's clear that the need is tremendous, because we had a 3-hour event, but in half the time, 500 families worth of food was distributed. And we had to tell people who came as early as 2:15 in an event that's supposed to go till 4 that we were out. And we're sorry to be able to relay that, but that's the fact that there's so much need that we can't necessarily always meet it. That's because of COVID and other issues in our city.
What are you hearing about, Auburn Gresham and the need here? What do folks need here?
Unemployment's record highs. I mean, people are absolutely living in fear, not just of fear of the police, but also fear of just leaving their doorstep and fear of how to keep food on their table and fear of how to keep a roof over their heads. And there's so many different needs that are competing, but at the very least, we can respond by putting together something to make sure people can have some food to eat and something for the holiday weekend to keep them over the grill and bring people together. But at the end of the day, there's much more systemic problems that we're also working to tackle at Social Change by changing policy and beyond.
The mayor and her police superintendent, they're deploying 1,200 cops over the course of the weekend. But at the same time, she acknowledges that the violence that we experience, is a result of systemic racism, poverty, and inequity. How would you rate her response to a lot that's going on right now, to this moment?
I think to have 1,200 police officers come is a continuation of Chicago's tradition of investing in incarceration versus liberation. And what I mean by that, there's too many people in our communities who truly aren't free right now. If you're worried about your public safety, if you're worried about food, you're worried about shelter, that's not freedom. So I think the very $130 million we invest in overtime for police, the very even $2.5 million we invest over this weekend to make sure there's more police on the street, that was all radically invested in liberating our communities and providing quality educations, access to true opportunities, second chances, business investment. Then we wouldn't have to worry about the same response to violence that we do in the South and West Sides right now. If our violence prevention strategy in Chicago and the South and West Sides mirrored that of Lake Forest or Wrigleyville or Lincoln Park, and we wouldn't have these same problems. What I mean by that is there is no violence prevention strategies there. It's because there's a super saturation of opportunity. Everywhere you go, there's an opportunity to better yourself, to get a job, to be in a position to do something for yourself and your family. Given that, violence is an outlier there versus an expectation as it is here. And that's what we should work to cultivate by investing and having that be the reality on the South and West Sides of Chicago.
Tell me a little bit about what Social Change does to that end, right? The legislation that you all work on.
That's right. So we work on removing the barriers that are usually impacting people's ability to own businesses, put themselves in a position to get further education, working on a piece of legislation that passed recently to ensure people had more access to grants within the context of getting secondary education, working on successfully passing legislation to ensure more people who had criminal histories were able to get occupational licenses so they could start businesses to be in a position to take care of themselves and their families, but also trying to modify our criminal justice system. At the end of the day, if people are being over-policed, they're not having an opportunity to really have the margin for error that's necessary just to function. And when you understand that, and when we're not providing meaningful second chances for people, we need to make sure that their first blush with law enforcement is one that's positive and instills trust versus fear. And right now that's not happening either, so we're advocating for the reinvestment of the money that's being put into things like overtime, into actually building significant community bridges between communities and the police, so there is a trusted mechanism so communities can have more say over how they're being policed and interacting with the police.
And we've got about 20 seconds left. Tell me a little bit about how the work that you do with lobbying and legislation, how that works in tandem with the work that we just saw here tonight with marches and rallies like this one.
Absolutely. Marches and rallies are critical for making sure the public is aware of what's going on. They make sure people understand the pain, the heartbreak. And the point is, prayerfully, to prick the conscience of the people who otherwise aren't paying attention, aren't engaged, and get them more engaged so they can use their influence, their time, and their opportunity structure to make sure there's more opportunities to change the legislation and systems responsible for creating these injustices that we experience.
And I'm sure folks will be seeing the folks we just saw marching through the neighborhood. My thanks to Todd Belcourt, Social Change. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity, Brandis. Thank you.
And Paris, we're going to send it back to you.
All right, Brandon, we'll check back in with you in just a bit. And up next, some universities are deciding to forego ACT and SAT scores due to the pandemic, but some advocates want to make that a permanent decision. More on that right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part through the generous support of the Julius Frankel Foundation.
Standardized college entrance tests like the ACT and SAT may soon be a thing of the past. More than half of all U.S. colleges and universities have dropped the requirement for ACT and SAT scores due to the pandemic. And while some are doing it just for this upcoming academic year, there's a growing trend of opting out of the requirement altogether. And joining us with more are Veronica Howad, the Deputy Director of Admission at the University of Chicago, and Kevin Brown, the Vice Provost for Academic and Enrollment Services at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Welcome, both of you, to Chicago Tonight. First, Kevin, your school is one of the schools canceling the test because of the pandemic. What brought you to that decision?
What we actually did was to say for fall of 21, given the confusion and the availability of the exams, we're going to waive the requirement for fall of 21. We're going to take this year and look at the results of that. It is still a requirement for admissions going forward, but we're making it test optional. There are some students who can use it to better their academic records, and for those students who can't get the exam, we don't want to hold them to a standard they can't meet at this point. At this point, massive numbers of exams have been canceled, and we just want to get that level of confusion off their table at this point.
And Veronica, the U of C has not been requiring these exams since 2018. So what is the argument against using these exams?
Correct. We went test optional in 2018 as part of our Empower initiative. I think colleges, especially admissions offices, we regularly assess access, right? Access to higher ed, access to this process. And for many different types of students, even in a normal year, access to testing and the ability to perform well on testing is a barrier. So why not remove that systemic barrier for students, if they, real or perceived, if they feel it's a barrier to them aspiring to college?
And has it changed the student body at all, or the kind of students that you're admitting?
We have seen in the last 2 years a more diverse applicant pool in every way. We have more students of color in the pool, more first generation students whose parents don't have college degrees, more veterans, more students from rural areas, you name it, we've seen a more diverse applicant pool. And when you have a more diverse top of your admissions funnel, your class can be more diverse. So we've seen the same in our student body. A more diverse class comes in through test optional admissions.
And Kevin, you said the UIC will still use the test in coming years. What is the argument for keeping the tests?
So there are some students who do well in exams. I was not one of them. My SAT, ACT would never get me into the University of Chicago. My grade point average might have. So we use the exam to allow students to demonstrate their excellence and their preparedness for universities to their advantage. And for the next year, students can still submit the exams results if they're available to bolster their case. We're the only industrialized nation in the world without a national secondary school leaving exam. And to some extent, it is a way of equalizing out grades from across the country, across 49 different other systems other than Illinois, and nearly 1 million high schools. So we want to be able to have it as a tool, but we've had programs for the last 5 years where if you're in the top 4% of an Illinois high school, we admit you test score blind because we know you've demonstrated the work in your school. And we're much more concerned about what you've done over 4 years than what you may have done over 2 or 3 hours.
Veronica, typically, how much weight has been given to these tests related to GPA or extracurricular activity or an essay?
Depends on the type of institution. For a school like UChicago, where in the college admissions process, we read applications holistically. That means that testing is just one part of several parts of an application that can tell you, even just on academics, student preparedness, for rigor, for college level writing and thinking. There are schools where it'll feature more prominently if they have a different formula for deciding who gets in and who doesn't. But for any school like UChicago, holistic admissions means we look at the whole. It's one of several pieces.
And Kevin, you mentioned the test as kind of an equalizer, although there are whole industries of test prep, classes, and books. If you don't have the resources to engage in that kind of prep, does it limit students that could be good candidates for UIC?
Exactly right. So the intent is to use it to the student's advantage. But again, giving much, much more weight in our holistic review to the grades in lieu of the SAT, ACT, but allowing students who shine through those exams to do so. And for those that can't or don't, we can then look at letters of recommendation, extracurricular activities, leadership opportunities, their role in the home, how they've been able to demonstrate success in context with their school. So it's always been a small part of it, but it's been a factor. And for the next year, it won't even play a factor unless they chose to bring it to us.
Veronica, do you think more colleges and higher education institutions should do away with ACT and SAT, or is this just something specific to you, U of C? You think it's good for them and other colleges should make their own decision?
I think every college has to make its own decision. We're all very different places. I do think there's something to be said for learning how to test when you have those resources and time. Their whole profession is built off of testing at every point. So we have to learn to test. Are there ways in which I'm sure many schools can improve their admissions process and think more broadly about other things that also show academic preparedness? Yes. But every college will have to make that decision. I'm glad we were able to make that decision, but it's coming to that point where now everyone is being forced to make that decision. And what will we see out of data and results for the next 2 to 3 years? I think that'll tell colleges a lot about how they will move forward.
I'm sure that'll be analyzed. All right, we're out of time. I want to thank Veronica Howitt and Kevin Brown. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
When it comes to Midwest beer brewing, Chicago tends to get overshadowed by neighbors like St. Louis and Milwaukee. But the production and, of course, consumption of beer has always been a vital part of the city's economic and social life. And now the revival of a popular early Chicago beer aims to prove that. Chicago Tonight producer Quinn Myers has more on the old and now new Conrad Sipe Brewing Company.
For more than a decade, the former Michael Reese Hospital site and nearby truck lot have sat in limbo, waiting for possible revival as a mixed-use development, or maybe the future Chicago casino. But before all of that, the Bronzeville plot was home to the Conrad Sipe Brewing Company, at one time the largest brewer in the United States.
In the 1870s, I believe it was the end of the 1870s, he was the #1 beer producer in America. And I think the numbers have been shown to be upwards of 250,000 barrels of beer per year by the end of the 19th century, which for anyone who brews beer, that's a lot of beer.
Lauren Mack is the that's 3 greats, granddaughter of Conrad Sipe himself, a German immigrant who came to Chicago in the 1850s. Over the next few decades, he would churn out German-style beers for thirsty Chicagoans and people across the country, growing his business exponentially. Mack says Sipe's success in the late 19th century came from a combination of hard work, ingenuity, and some good luck.
Sipe was one of the few breweries that did not burn down during the Great Fire of 1871. It was outside of the fire line. So certainly not good luck for the city that so much of the city burned, but from the point of view of brewing capacity, he was able to keep brewing during a time when the city really needed beer to feed its workers and to keep the city quenched as they rebuilt.
The brewery would eventually close in the early 1930s. But a few years ago, Mack started toying with an idea. What if she brought back the Conrad Sipe Brewing Company? She had heard so much about it growing up, but had never been able to taste her family's beer. Through a connection at the Chicago Brewseum, Mack linked up with Metropolitan Brewing, a Northside craft brewery. Together, they've spent the past year reviving Sipe's Extra Pale Pilsner, one of the original brand's top sellers. Now, almost a century since the brewery closed, Chicagoans will once again be able to sip Sipe's beer. Metropolitan owners Tracy and Doug Hurst say for them, working on the Sipe's project made perfect sense. For one thing, they specialize in making German-style lagers, and they were also attracted to the local history.
What I thought was really exciting about the project is Conrad Sipe's descendant, female descendant, Lauren Mack, was heading up the project. Craft beer, like a lot of industries in our culture, doesn't really feature enough women. So the fact that she was heading up this project made it really exciting for me.
There wasn't an exact recipe for the extra pail available, so they relied on hints from old notes and records, buoyed by Doug's extensive knowledge of brewing German lagers.
There was not a lot of information about the recipes and so forth. So then I had to go back and look at so-called pre-prohibition lagers and pilsners. And we think about Miller and Budweiser today. The beer that they were making and many other breweries like them before Prohibition was a little bit different. It was stronger in flavor. It had more hops in it, but it still used corn or rice like they use today.
And 87 years after the original Sipes was shuttered, and after hearing about the beer for her whole life, Mac finally was able to try one.
To be able to taste something that he would have tasted, to be able to bring back something from history that he created, it was just a very poignant moment for me, and I feel very lucky that I get to hold that memory, and I always will.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Quinn Myers.
You can drink Sipes Extra Pale Pilsner right now at Metropolitan Brewing's tap room. It'll also be available next week in select Chicago stores and bars. And now we go back with check back in with Brandis Friedman in Chicago's Auburn Gresham neighborhood. Brandis.
Yeah, Paris, this time we've got Carlos Nelson. He's with the Greater Auburn Gresham Community Development Corporation. Carlos, thank you again for joining us.
Not a problem. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So back in April when Paris was here, you, a number of elected officials from this community, you all were very angry about how COVID-19 was being managed here at the time. How is it being handled now, managed now?
Well, absolutely. Back then, our community was being ravaged by COVID-19. We had no testing sites. We had little attention to or access to health and wellness. And since then, the mayor's office of racial equity and rapid response team that she put together has really kind of helped us to attempt to overwhelm the virus. And so we've been improving substantially here in the Auburn Gresham community.
Now, today we saw there was a mobile testing site right here in this parking lot. Across the street, about a block over, there is another testing site that was closed today. How has the pandemic kind of exposed the health disparities that already existed?
Oh, absolutely. Well, that's what was so painful, about this pandemic and how it affected our community. We've known all along that this community has been a health and wellness desert. The fact that we were all screaming for a testing site in this community where the very first death in the state of Illinois occurred just 2.5 blocks from where we're standing was really a travesty. And so we now have Friend Health, supported by University of Chicago, providing free testing. We've had more than 1,000 tests performed at that testing site that we've stood up. And now we've implemented mobile testing to address the large numbers of residents in congregate centers. So things are on the uptick.
How would you say the health disparities, though, have been exposed? People in lower income communities, people of color?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so we've not had access to health care in this community. The nearest hospital miles away. Just few clinics in the community, and it was just time to address these health disparities, which is why our organization, led by community partners, have been fighting to get a full-service health center built here in Auburn Gresham.
You also received $4 million in funding this week from the city's Invest Southwest program. How is that going to be used?
Well, that's exciting news, and because we fought to get a full-service health center, the mayor's office recognized that the CARES Act funding was there to support COVID-19. Our health center was part of our recovery effort. So that money will be used to build out a full-service health center, to build out the Auburn Gresham Healthy Lifestyle Hub at 839 West 79th Street, just steps away from 79th and Halsted.
What kind of services can community members expect to receive there?
It's going to be really exciting. We're expecting a groundbreaking sometime within the next few months, but you'll be able to get access to not only general health care services, mental health services, oral health services. We also have a sit-down restaurant that has an offering for vegan, vegetarian, and those that enjoy seafood as well. It's Mickey's Retro Grill, an African-American owned restaurant. It's also a digital community center within that building. That building, once fully completed, will have up to 100 to 150 living wage jobs in that building right near 79th and Halsted.
And before I let you go, I saw a Walgreens on the corner over here, still boarded up, though it is open. How would you say businesses have been recovering these last few weeks?
Oh, it's been a very slow recovery. Watching the Walgreens get, almost burned down. The CVS pharmacy closed up. The Save-A-Lot closed up. Many other businesses were destroyed. It's been a very slow recovery, and we've penalized ourselves. Now we have literally no access to pharmacies or groceries. Thank God Walgreens has stood up this mobile testing site, mobile pharmacy.
Absolutely. Okay, yeah. Carlos Nelson, thank you again for joining us. Best of luck to you.
Thank you.
And Paris, we'll be back to wrap it up with you in just a little bit. For now, I'm going to send it back to you in the studio.
Brandis, please tell Carlos I say hi. It's great to see him, and I know he's been fighting for that health center for a long time. And we're back.
I will tell him.
All right, and we're back with some history behind fighting for women's rights to vote in an all-new Ask Jeffrey right after this.
Ask Jeffrey is made possible in part by BMO Harris Bank.
Wow, you ready?
Yeah, let me just grab my wallet.
Uh-oh, I've seen this before. Wallet way too big, skinny jeans too skinny.
I'll just carry it.
Before you break something, you should know you don't actually need a wallet. With BMO Harris, you can just take cash out with your phone. Or if you need to, you can pay them with Zelle. That works? Yeah. You're stuck, aren't you?
Smile.
Woo, those jeans are way too tight.
That feeling you get when no wallet is no big deal. That's the BMO effect.
2020 is the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment, which secured women's right to vote. A major two-part PBS documentary called The Vote chronicles the long fight for women's suffrage. You can catch it next week on WTTW on Monday and Tuesday, and here's a clip.
The textbooks when I went to school said women were given the vote. We weren't given anything. We took it.
You had 5,000 women marching down Pennsylvania Avenue, and surrounding them were 100,000 men, many of them drunk. And they assaulted the marchers and sent 100 of them to the hospital.
Alice Paul is an absolute force of nature. She's impatient and confrontational.
People felt that she was going to import militant tactics.
Black women have a stake in this question. They see it as part of a larger struggle for racial justice.
Southerners were very frightened. The senator from Mississippi said that'll be the end of white supremacy if black women get the vote.
But there's an untold part of this suffrage story, and it centers on Chicago. Jeffrey Bayer is here to tell us about it in this edition of Ask Jeffrey. Jeffrey, great to see you again.
Good to see you, Paris.
Okay, so what is this untold story?
Well, it's a dramatic and frankly a sad fight between two famous champions of social justice, Chicago's Ida B. Wells and Evanston's Frances Willard. At its center was a tension between suffrage crusaders on the one side and those fighting for black citizenship and voting rights after the Civil War on the other side. Each group felt that its cause should take precedence because fighting for both causes was just too much radical change for the country to accept.
All right, so you have these two causes. How do Ida B. Wells and Frances Willard play into this?
Well, Frances Willard put women's suffrage first. She was the former Dean of Women at Northwestern University, and in 1879, she became the president of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, which was a worldwide organization dedicated to outlawing alcoholic beverages. Under Willard's leadership, the WCTU grew into the largest organization of women in the 19th century. Now, Willard felt that if women got the vote, they would be key to passing a constitutional amendment prohibiting alcohol.
Of course, Ida B. Wells is the famous journalist, civil rights leader, and founding member of the NAACP.
Yes, and in fact, this past May, she was posthumously awarded a Pulitzer Prize for her work famously exposing the horrors of lynching in the South.
Right, and it seems like these two women might have a lot in common. So what was their dispute?
Right. So unfortunately, the conflict between Willard and Wells erupted in 1892 after Willard made racist statements in an interview with a New York newspaper while she was touring the South. In that article, she implied that black men were a threat to white women. And that was the very sentiment that lynchers used to justify their murders. Willard was quoted as saying, "The colored race multiplies like locusts of Egypt. The safety of women, of childhood, of home is menaced in 1,000 localities at this moment."
Something I didn't know about her. So what did Willard have to gain by making such racist statements?
Well, Ida B. Wells saw these horrible statements by Frances Willard as a cynical effort to win over Southern whites to her cause. She said that Willard had, quote, unhesitatingly slandered the entire Negro race in order to gain favor with those who are hanging, shooting, and burning Negroes alive. Willard reacted defensively. She called Wells's characterization of her remarks absurd and untrue, and she even suggested that Wells would lose support for her cause. As a result, Wells hit back, saying, quote, "Miss Willard is no better or no worse than the great bulk of white Americans on the Negro question. They are all afraid to speak out." And this war of words continued in the press for months. Ultimately, the pressure was really on Willard to take a public stand against lynching. In the wake of this dispute, the WCTU indeed did put forward multiple anti-lynching positions and even a resolution that was finally passed at a convention in 1895. But by that point, Willard was already in poor health. She died in 1898. She was only 58 years old, and her legacy really was clouded by this clash. Ida B. Wells, of course, continued to fight racism and injustice for another more than 30 years. Still, long after Frances Willard's death, Wells continued to be ill-treated by the suffrage movement. There's one incident in particular that's covered in this PBS documentary that we're showing next week called The Vote. This took place in 1913 at a women's march in Washington, D.C., organized by a suffrage leader named Alice Paul, who had invited all women to march. But take a look at what happened.
Eager to mobilize African American women, Wells recently had founded the Alpha Suffrage Club, the first black suffrage organization in Chicago, and she intended to represent it in Alice Paul's parade.
Alice Paul had every expectation that African American women would march. African American women had marched in the New York parade, and she had already reached out to African Americans, encouraging them to think about marching. She was quickly disillusioned that that was a good idea when some of the Washington women came to her and said that that simply was not acceptable.
And so, Jeffrey, I have to know how this story ends.
Well, the march's organizers caved in to demands, and they did segregate the march. But Ida B. Wells, she was undeterred. Halfway through the march, she emerged from a chaotic crowd of drunken male spectators and triumphantly took her place at the front of the Illinois delegation.
And so will we see this story of the dispute between Frances Willard and Ida B. Wells in this upcoming PBS documentary?
No, actually, it's not in there. And in fact, Willard isn't even mentioned at all. But the story of their conflict is documented in an excellent online exhibit from the Frances Willard House Museum and Archives in Evanston. They worked in collaboration with scholars from Northwestern University and Loyola University Chicago. And we've put a link to that and to other resources on our website.
All right, it's a fascinating history. Jeffrey, thank you so much.
Thanks, Paris.
And again, you can catch the PBS documentary, The Vote, this Monday and Tuesday at 9 p.m. on WTTW. And don't forget that you can visit our website for more details and find previous questions answered by Jeffrey Bayer and even submit your own. That's at WTTW.com/news. And we're joined again by Brandis Friedman, who spent the day reporting in Auburn Gresham on the city's south side. Brandis, you spoke to some business owners today. What's the economic recovery looking like over there?
Well, in Paris, I spoke to a few community members more than that. I heard from Father Pfleger as well as the outreach workers that I spoke with, and a lot of them say, the businesses are very slow to come back. Not just the ones that are locally owned, because even when you drive through the neighborhood, you can see that so many of them are still boarded up, many of them with signs painted outside that say that their business is Black-owned, hoping to deter any of those who might want to inflict some property damage. And you just heard from Carlos Nelson, who said it as well, that the businesses are slow to come back. Even Father Pfleger tells me that the Bank of America is still closed down. So I think it means a lack of access to some certain services that a lot of residents here are experiencing. In Paris, we're into our 1 week of phase 4. What are you going to be looking out for?
Like you are, the businesses, there have been reports of packed bars and restaurants going well beyond the capacity that they're supposed to. And you've seen, states like New Jersey all of a sudden go back on the whole indoor dining thing. So is Illinois going to do that? I think we'll know more about that next week. No indication yet, but, things seem to be going in a certain direction. Anyway, Brandis, thank you so much. And a note before we go. A longtime member of the Chicago Tonight team is calling it a career, and a great career at that. Tom Siegel has been an outstanding cameraman I don't even recognize you there, Tom. Wow, you look great. At WTTW for 36 years. In addition to Chicago Tonight, he's worked on award-winning programs and documentaries, too numerous to mention here. Tom, thank you for all the great work, and enjoy your well-deserved retirement. We're sure going to miss you here. And that is our show for this Thursday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night at 7 for the Week in Review. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe and healthy, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that is proud of its partners named Illinois leading lawyers by the Law Bulletin Publishing Company of Chicago.